Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today to talk at this MedComms networking event. My name is Jayne Packham and I've spent the last 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry. Part of that was working within companies, MSD and Pharmacia as they were then, but also 15 years running my own consultancy company. And really of particular relevance today is that as part of that, I spent a lot of time training companies, agencies, sort of individuals on this rather exciting document, the ABPI Code of Practice. And so what I'd like to do in this session is really just give you a bit of an idea as to what is this code? What does it cover? Is it a legal requirement? So do we have to follow it? And also a bit about who uses it. But I think probably the most important question that you might be thinking is, does it apply to me? Have I got to worry about this document? Should it be on my radar? So first of all, what is this document about? Why do we need to have this code of practice, as it's fondly called within the UK? Well, the origins, it was actually first written in the UK back in 1958. And for those of you sort of eagle-eyed motorway travellers will know that that is the year that the M1 motorway opened up. So it's nothing new within the UK. And it was written by a group of companies getting together and they said, we want to maintain high standards across the industry. We want to be seen as professional, ethical. We want to be transparent in our working practices and make sure that everything that we say in our promotion of medicines is going to truly support high quality healthcare. But there is a bit of a myth out there, I have to say, that some people think, well, this is about promotion, this is about sales and marketing, but it's absolutely not. There is lots of information within this document which is way outside of the remit of promotion, and so that is probably why it's going to be important to you. And what I want to do at this very early stage is just issue a bit of a spoiler alert, because you know what these presentations are like. You want to know that last question, what is the relevance to me? And it's the last slide. But no, I'm going to cut straight to the chase really and say that it is more likely than not to be highly relevant for the work that you're doing, even though you might not actually think it is. So let me give you a few sort of little snippets as to the scope of information which is covered within the code. Now, the section on the left-hand side, particularly at the top there, we've got things like promotion of medicines, things that sales reps are doing, maybe adverts in journals or on websites and things. And so I hope that you're thinking, well, those are blatantly promotional activities, probably by sales and marketing within companies. But then if we look a bit further down, we've then got how we use information, how we make claims and comparisons. Maybe if we're writing materials for the public or sort of media as well. But then we get into a whole array which you might be thinking, well, actually, these are not potentially sounding that promotional. Giving gifts, maybe giving grants, sort of sponsorship. What about running meetings, using consultants, running advisory board meetings? I shall come back to those. And even things like working with patient organisations and putting information, even if it's factual and balanced, onto the internet. This is all covered under the scope of the code. So it's incredibly wide-ranging and far-reaching. So the way that the code is set out is that it's issued in a number of clauses, and what I would flag to you, one that I think is super important for you, is clause 16. And it's quite simple. It says that all relevant personnel, including contractors, so this is not just the pharmaceutical industry, it's anyone working to help and support behind the scenes, must be trained in the code if you're preparing or approving materials and if you're doing any of those activities which are covered by the code. And again, just to stress, it's not just a promotional, it's all those non-promotional things as well. So who abides by this code? The ABPI code is specific to the UK, and the simple answer is it's really virtually all UK pharmaceutical companies have chosen to accept this code. Now, if your client or if the company is actually a member of the ABPI, so that's the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, they have no option. They must comply fully with the code. But that's about sort of 50, 60 companies, something like that. We've got hundreds of other companies in the UK, but most of those others have decided that they are going to abide and voluntarily agree to follow everything within the code. And if companies get it wrong, then there are fines and there are penalties for breaching the particular code. So we've got that the code started off as about maintaining high standards. That's still really, really important for the pharmaceutical industry. But it's more than that. It's also about companies getting together and thinking, let's issue some guidance as to how we think companies should conduct themselves to maintain these high standards. And there's a series of guidance documents, not just in the UK, it's way beyond that, sort of within Europe, globally as well, that issue guidance. So let me share with you a few of those so you can see what we're talking about. I like to think of it as almost a code guidance cascade. And so at the top we've got an organisation called the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, so the IFPMA. They have a code. You may or may not have come across it, but the one that I would suggest that you do have a look at is something called the ABPI Code, because this is the European equivalent of it. And the way that it works is whatever's in the IFPMA code has to be adopted into the ABPI Code, and then whatever's in that European ABPI Code then has to be adopted into all the national country codes. So in the UK, we've got the ABPI Code, but then we've got parallel codes in France, Germany, Spain, etc., etc. So it gets a little complicated and confusing if you're doing materials globally or in European, because you've got to look at all these different codes and look at the finer detail to see exactly what is allowed in different countries. Just worth saying that the ABPI code there that I mentioned, they've actually got 3 codes. They've got a promotional code. They've also got a code that is addressing working with patient organisations. But then they've got a super important code which is all about transparency. And so if you or any of your clients are talking about transfer of value, then this is where it's come from in that ABPI code, which is then cascaded and has set out the guidelines for every country along the way. So what sort of things might be under guidance? Well, if you're thinking about running a meeting and you're thinking about hospitality, can we take them out for a meal? How much can we spend? That's the type of thing that you'll find within the national country codes, a ceiling level as to how much you can spend on food and drinks per person at an event. Or if you're very much on the promotional side and you're including prescribing information on your adverts or your materials, then again, the local codes will have information as to what things you need to put in place to make that information legible. So it'll tell you things like the point size, the number of characters that you can have on a line, the use of bold to communicate and get that across clearly. And then we've got that third aspect. And it's important, I think, that I say that the ABPI code, it's not a legal document in itself, but importantly, it has a huge amount of the legal requirements built into it. So it's almost like it's a legal document plus a lot more that you need to take on board. And I tend to say that if you're having problems sleeping, then there's lots of law and regulations that you can have a read of. Of course, we've got European law. Don't start me on this one. Who knows what the future is going to be? But the key European law there is the 2012 Human Medicines Regulation. But it's beyond that, because of course in the UK we've got UK law as well, enforced by the UK regulators. And if you're wanting to know, well, what does the UK law say, then I strongly suggest you have a look at the MHRA's Blue Guide. Probably your quickest way to find it is Google MHRA Blue Guide, and you can download a PDF version of that, which just talks about the legislation. And some of the key things in there, I think the big ones, which you may well have come across, are things like, in the UK, we can't promote a prescription-only medicine to the public. In New Zealand you can, in the States you can, but not in the UK and certainly not within Europe either. And again, if we look at the promotional aspect as well, then each product has got a license or a marketing authorisation. So the UK code makes it very, very clear that you can't promote a medicine outside the terms of that licence. So that's the type of thing that it includes within the legislation, and it's incorporated into the code and then goes way beyond it. So in terms of you keeping up to date with the code, it's quite hard, I'd have to say, because our code is changing constantly. We have a myriad, a rainbow version of different codes here, and this is just from the last 2 or 3 years. At the moment, we've got the lovely, I think rather nice blue version, which is the 2016 version of the code. And don't be put off. I know we're in 2017, but this is still the current code at the moment. We're expecting a new one in 2018. But as you'll see from all the colours going on there, it changes very frequently. And the reasons behind that is because the legislation changes, or the FPA code might change, which will then automatically cascade down into all these national country codes. And then as well, I mentioned that if companies get it wrong, then they actually go to the PMCPA, who are the people that administer the code. And we then have in the UK code cases which are published. And every now and then the PMCPA will actually look at the code cases and go, right, that's a significant finding. We're then going to incorporate it into our code. And so you'll see these sorts of changes being incorporated as well. So my top tip for you on this aspect is, don't rely on the yellow or the green version of the code and think, oh, I know the code because I've done that. Make sure that you get regular training on it because it can change significantly from year to year. One little point for you, you might be thinking at this stage, well, I work on global materials or I work on Europe, so what to the UK code? This doesn't apply to me. What I would just like to stress to you really is that there are common themes across all the codes, particularly across Europe, because they are derived from that FPA code. And the other thing just to mention is that the UK ABPI code is actually seen as one of the strictest codes out there. And so quite often companies that are producing global and European materials, they'll actually use the UK code as a base for producing the global materials. Because the idea is that if it gets through the UK code, you're probably 70–80% of the way there for when you then roll those materials out to Europe. So I'm a little biased, but that's another good reason as well to have a look at the UK code, maybe as a starting point. So I just want to finish up by just giving you a few examples and coming back to that question, does the code apply to you? Have you really got to be bothered about it? And so let me share with you 3 and 4 examples as to, things that you might be doing and why I think, you might actually just need to find that document, open it up and have a closer look. So it may be that you're working on, say, sales materials. Maybe you're doing some rep training materials, or maybe you're the ones that are involved in writing and drafting those adverts which are going to go out to healthcare professionals. Now, for me, these are blatantly promotional materials. So these fall very, very much within any code of practice. And so all those materials will need to be fully code compliant, and they'll need to be certified by the pharmaceutical company. And by certification, I'm talking about qualified people, normally pharmacists or doctors within the industry, who will scrutinise all the information to make sure that they really do adhere to the standards put out in the code. But you may be working on a few other things. What about if you're writing a manuscript? So you've got some clinical research data and your brief is to write that clinical paper and it's going to be published. And the question that I'd put to you here is, how is the client then going to use it? If the sales force are then going to use that clinical paper in their promotion, then there are major things within the code. There are restrictions on some words. There are certain ways that you need to express that information. And if you're going to be talking about things like endpoints and relative risk, then you absolutely need to open that code and look at the finer detail. And again, the code gives you information about how to use graphs, stats, and all this sort of thing. So that aspect of the code could be highly relevant for you. Let me share with you this one. The Telegraph in 2015 did some undercover reporting. This is just one of many articles which you may have seen. The headline is not what the pharmaceutical industry wants to be associated with. Ministers, so the government, are launching an urgent inquiry into NHS officials' second jobs at drug firms. And this all related to pharma companies running advisory board meetings, and in this instance in a rather exotic and lavish looking hotel in Zagreb. So it's another example that if you're involved in running this sort of meeting, even if it's a non-promotional meeting, then oh my word, you definitely need to look at the code, because again there's lots of information there about choosing the location, the venue, how much you can pay those people that are going to give you information in that meeting. There's detailed information about the consultancy contracts, what needs to be in it, and also information about how much involvement the pharmaceutical can actually have. And if you get any of those details wrong, then you might have thought that you were actually running a non-promotional meeting, but actually it's very, very easy just to fall over, and suddenly that meeting could turn into a promotional meeting. And so multiple clauses of the code then impact on this sort of arena. And then the final one, just for you to have a think about, you may be, for example, organising an exhibition stand. Maybe you're doing it yourself, or you're working on behalf of a client. And again, the code gives a lot of information about what refreshments can you have. You might be thinking, yeah, we could do tea, coffees, but there have been some very interesting cases recently about frozen yoghurt and chai latte. Read the code and find out more. Can you give out pens? Can you give out clinical papers? So again, all these sorts of questions are answered within the code, and some extra guidance documents as well. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's given you a bit of flavour as to what it's about, and I'm hoping that you might be thinking, actually, maybe I do need to find that document. Go and download it on the PMCPA website. That's where you'll find it. And if you need any extra help, if you need to have any training on it, then I run a lot of bespoke in-house training. A lot of the sections won't apply. I do some open day courses as well, and some webinars and things as well. So if you do need to get in touch, pop onto my website. There's my email address. But happy coding. Many thanks.